Hello, everyone. I would like to get started so we can have enough time to make sure that we get engagement with the panel. So, panelists, would you like to come up now so we can all get settled in? Before we get going, and while the panelists are coming up, I'll do just a quick little background information on sort of what this series is about. So I'm Dr. Cori Wong. I'm the director of the Women and Gender Collaborative, and this is the second of a three-part series that we have going on this semester for women in leadership. The program is sponsored through the Women and Gender Collaborative, but with support from the Office of Equal Opportunity, the Vice President's Office for Diversity, and then additional support from Training and Organizational Development. And it has been put together by a planning committee, so I would like to acknowledge all the people who have made this possible, and thank you for your effort and participation in this. And also thank you for being here, because these events are really exciting and we're happy to be able to offer them. Our next program in the series will be April 6th, where we're talking about navigating systems as an outsider within. The registration for that is already full, so if you are part of that, congratulations, you made it in, and if not, but you're interested, don't worry, because you can notice that we have a camera in the back, and our intention was to record these sessions so that we can make them accessible and available to others who maybe weren't able to attend, or for future reference, because the panelists that we have engaging in these programs are just so phenomenal that we didn't want to miss the opportunity to archive it and keep record of it. So with that said, there will be time at the end of our program for some Q&A, but I want to give you a heads up that if you do ask a question, know that there's a camera and it's being recorded. Just keep that in mind. And then before we really get going to, I wanted to see if we could kind of gauge a little bit of who's in the room so that we know where you are located within the university and what your interest might be in coming to this particular program on university funding and budgets. So, if you are in an academic college or unit, can you raise your hand? Okay. If you're doing more operations or student engagement, can you raise your hand to that one? Okay. If anybody else is here who's like, I don't know where I'm, or not those, would you be willing to shout out if you feel like you're somewhere else more unique than those general places? Okay, great. Thank you. The system office. Any others? Yeah. What was that? Okay, great. Congratulations. Okay, the STEM Center, and then finishing PhD, graduate student. Okay, great. Thank you so much. All right, so our program is going to run with a little bit of an introduction to start with some general questions for the panelists, and then each panelist has actually prepared their own content based on their location and what their role is within the university. So it's kind of different from a panel where this is really a series of 3 presentations, but there will be time at the end for Q&A, and we're going to kind of keep it moving so that we'll make sure we're fluid and staying on track. But the first question is sort of an introductory question for all 3 panelists. Would you please introduce yourself and explain a little bit more about your role within the university? And while you're answering your role, can you speak to any way in which gender has informed your experience of being in that role? So introductions. Who wants to start?
I'll go ahead.
Okay.
Are these on?
Are the microphones on? They should be, yes. Maybe just speak into them.
Good afternoon. Thanks for coming out today. And Cori, thank you so much for pulling this together. My name is Lynn Johnson. I'm the Vice President for University Operations and also the Chief Financial Officer for the university. I also have another role, which is the Chief Financial Officer for the Colorado State University system. And so in that role, I would say probably the best way that defines that is who do I spend most of my time working with on the individuals who report up through to me. And I would say that facilities, Diana Prieto, along with the OEO, HR, training and organizational group, and then I have Angie Nielsen, who is in the budget office. I do spend a lot of time working on budgets, and that spans a lot of work that I do with Dr. Rick Miranda, and every once in a while, Tony still, Dr. Frank still gets engaged in the budgeting process. But as he's transitioned a little bit more to his dual role, he's stepped back a little bit and put more of that responsibility on Dr. Miranda and myself. I also spend a lot of time with Bob Schur, who has oversight for risk management, EHS, and central receiving and the surplus operations. And he himself is the director of the policy office. So I spend a lot of time working with Bob. He tends to be, in many ways, my right-hand guy to say when I've got something new coming into my office that's not specifically related to one of the areas, I tend to turn to Bob because he's very, very good about understanding the nature of the operations of the university, particularly from thinking from that policy perspective. So the influencer of being a female, I really struggled with that given the conversations that we've been having on around campus. Is it really gender, the question, or is it really our pronouns? Because I think our pronouns speak a little more loudly towards our tendencies, I suppose I would say. So I'm a she, her, hers, and I think with that I acknowledge being more on the feminine side, and I think there are some generalities, dangerously so, that you can make about femininity, and I think that comes with many of us being moms, and as a result of having some of those roles, you tend to find yourself, and this very much fits my role at the university, as I'm very task-oriented. I've got stuff to get done, and it's got to get scheduled, and we got to move and get it done, and I think that comes with my role of being this mom because it translates very well into my life at home because schedules are crazy when you have children. So very task-oriented. I'm also one who, and this comes from my background being in public accounting, just because this is the way we've done things doesn't necessarily mean it's the way that we should always do it. So I look at that as being transformational. Always looking to say, how can we do things better? How can we do them differently? And from my perspective, I think that is a trait that we as females tend to bring along with us because we've always had to address those kinds of things at home. So those would be the couple of things I would toss out there. I'm sure other things that I would add are going to be repeated by Jan and by Kim, so I'm going to leave some room for them to talk about what it means to be a female here at CSU.
Thanks, Lynn.
Sort of wish I had gone first. I don't do anything that Lynn does. This is a great panel. We overlap in space and time, but anyway. I'm Jan Nerger, and I'm Dean of the College of Natural Sciences. And I actually have been at CSU for a very long time. I started out as an assistant professor and moved my way through the ranks. And after becoming full professor, I moved into the dean's office. I'm the first woman dean in the college. We used to have a group that would get together of sort of women administrators. I thought it was Women Administrators Club, but it turned to be Wednesday Afternoon Club. But I thought, anyway, it was all of these women administrators, and there was none from my college because there were no women associate chairs, there were no women chairs, there were no women associate deans, so it was me. And that does set you, it's a little bit different, a different perspective when you go into meetings. Now though, I've been dean now, this is my 8th year, and I have two women associate deans, I have a woman chair, I have 3 women associate chairs, and I think I'm not taking credit by any means for that, but I do think people are watching, and they're feeling more comfortable in certain ways. I don't know, having all men as the people that direct report to me, these 8 senior faculty men, and I walk in as the woman dean, and they're kind of looking and wondering how this is going to work. And I think part of it is that my leadership style is different. I don't know if it's a woman's leadership style or a man's leadership style, but it's certainly different. I really care about people. I really care about everybody's voice being heard. And I don't know if I think that's because I'm Jan Nerger, not because of my pronouns. Mm-hmm. But you are set up a little bit different. People ask you different questions. The question that I think all 3 of us, everybody in the room gets is, how do you balance? How do you balance everything? And the answer to that is we don't. We don't balance. And I think of it as a pendulum. swinging, and it's always swinging. And sometimes you're too much on this side, and sometimes you're too much on this side. But if we were balanced, we'd be sitting here not moving. I can guarantee you that's not where we're ever, right? What I try to do is get the swings to kind of reduce. I don't want to be here, I don't want to be here, I want to be kind of here, you know? And so that's what I consider balance. But I'm anxious actually to tell you about a little bit about budgeting and how money flows through the college. Just want to make one point really clear up front. This is the person that allows me to have a budget. And so if
It's a
she
new phenomenon.
if she decides not to, then my slides are irrelevant. I just want to say that. Okay.
Thanks, Jan. Good afternoon. Thanks for the invitation, Cori. I was excited to be put in this group because for a long time, people didn't understand the value of advancement, or what the heck is it anyway, and why does it matter? And oh, by the way, you're sucking resources from our academic mission. And so that I am a rare breed. I grew up in the advancement profession. I have a degree, master's degree in philanthropy and development. I'm also a PhD candidate. I'm defending next Wednesday. Don't come to the defense, though. So I'm really committed to higher education and philanthropy in the intersection. And so my job is to be the chief philanthropy officer of the institution. Our team really works in 4 areas. You've heard probably maybe the 3 areas of philanthropy is time, talent, treasure. We also add testimony in there. So our alumni team, I'll get into our structure a little bit later and maybe who I work with most, but we work on those 4 things on behalf of the institution. We're really the intersection between our alumni, our community, and the great work that all of you are doing. And how do we bring that alive, which ties back to our presentation today, that we do make a big difference to the bottom line of the institution in terms of funding and dollars. And so as we've made more of a difference to the university's budgets over time, it really has legitimized within college campus, on college campuses, not just at CSU, the work of advancement. And if you're familiar with the ACE does a study every 5 years of American college presidents. The most recent one just came out in December, and they asked presidents, what's on your mind? How do you spend your time? And the number one thing on their mind are finances, and number 2 followed by that is fundraising and how they're going to generate private support. How do they spend their time? Most of their time is dedicated to finances and working with alumni and donors. Number one thing they enjoy and get positive feedback from the audience, alumni. So it's satisfying work for them too. It's making a difference to bringing in revenue into the institution, but it's satisfying for our leaders to work in this space because they really care and love the institution and the work that all of you are doing. How does gender impact and influence my role? I work in a profession different than Jan, that it is very heavily female dominated. 70% of AFP, Association of Fundraising Professionals nationwide, are women. At CSU, we have 67% of our 153 team members are women. We've worked to actually bring diversification and have more men work in our profession. One of the challenges is that the women nationwide, men tend to hold those higher level positions with more power and garner higher salaries. I'm proud to say at CSU, we've been working on that. The women in our top ranks, even though in our top level of executive director, we have more men than women by 1 position, the women on average make more. And that hasn't just happened. It's been how we have paid attention to these things over time, how we recruit people, making sure we have leaders that signal we are a progressive division and welcome to all backgrounds and the intersectionality of all people's beings and who they are. But at the end of the day, I think why women have traditionally selected this profession is that it's really relationship based. And so women are good at building relationships. There's plenty of studies that actually substantiate that in terms of being good listeners, having good intuition. They're great negotiators, especially even if you don't think you are, on behalf of other people. So people on our team who have to find the intersection between what's good for the university and somebody else, you have to be willing to find win-wins and to check your ego at the door and listen. And I think that's why we've seen so many people self-select into this profession over time. So we have some unique challenges on the other side to balance out
our team. So we have diverse opinions and thoughts and backgrounds within the profession. But I think that really is, when I reflected on the question, thought that really has contributed to, I think, why so many women have chosen this as a profession. One of the challenges that brings, I know you didn't ask about that, but I just thought I'd touch on that quickly. So I told you about the things that work well and why I probably, without knowing it, chose this profession. But there are a lot of challenges around that in terms of how do you integrate into a man's world? And at my level, at the VP level, going in CEOs to CEO, there's a lot of people in corporate America, still heavily male dominated. How do you have presence when you go in and negotiate corporate gifts and things like that? Athletics is a very big part of what we do in our engagement strategy, and how do we be respected partners in that space is also another challenge. And then also something we're really working on, and I can talk to people about this later, is the power dynamic that comes with working with people outside the institution. Our team is on the road all the time. They go to people's homes, they're at events. There's a lot of interesting dynamics there, and really sexual harassment outside the workplace with people who are donors, alumni, and that dynamic. And as a division, we're starting to really tackle that and talk to people about our largely female staff about being safe, and there is no gift worth putting your own personal safety at risk in the work that you do. So that's one of the challenges that has come up, and a unique thing about being a woman in the roles that I represent. So.
Yeah, thank you. So we have a couple minutes before we need to jump in, and instead of jumping right in, I want to draw out some of the things that were already stated, because some really cool things happened here. First, I'm glad, Kim, that you eventually said at the VP level, because this is Kim Tobin, VP for University Advancement.
Oh, did I miss that part?
Maybe it's always about skip that little place. But we have women in many positions of leadership at CSU that are fantastic. But what you have also offered are a lot of the dynamics that are backed by data and research of, Lynn, your comments about being a mom and what it means to be a mom and then be task-oriented and be successful in your work. There is research to prove that moms get stuff done. And so despite some of the prejudice against mothers with children as working parents, and like the baby penalty and the setbacks that can happen to women's career by being a mother, we also know that women are some of the best employees, especially when they are moms. And so if you ever struggle with that, like, know that there's research to back up that you are a valuable, contributing employee, and there's added strength and skill set from the experience of being a parent too. It's just interesting that that comes up in terms of the question of balance and then parenting more for women than it does for men. Mm-hmm. So there's that difference. But then talking about, Jan, your story too, of being the one woman in a college that is predominantly represented by men, and then the changes over time of having more women come into your college in other various levels of leadership. I think that that signals something very important around culture change. We also know that there is research to back the idea that if you hire more women, that people do better. Cultures change, and then the units do better too. So it'd be interesting to see, in addition to the fact that you are dean, then more women can come on when there are women in leadership positions, that's a tangible change in the culture, but there can be other intangible qualities that focus. And I think the way that you were talking about focusing on relationships and people, and caring about the people who are in your college is one of those things that we know when women are in leadership positions. It doesn't have to be a feminine, masculine sort of thing, but it is a way of being a leader and caring about people that I think is probably connected to the shift in the demographics within your college.
I just want to say some days I don't care.
Sure. And that's fine.
This is why
You've got a lot.
I told her, please don't film this. I mean, I can't help myself.
And then Kim, another thing that you also slipped in that I think is very important for people to recognize and appreciate is that you're a woman in a vice president position of leadership, and you're working on your PhD. And I think that that's an added piece of the conversation that we don't often hear men talk about in terms of how they are leaders and how they're continuing to develop and grow. And I just appreciate that you commented that, because it demonstrates that there's still so much room to keep growing and adding to your credentials and developing your own career while you're at it. So it's probably a lot to handle all at once. But it's really awesome to have role models to know that you can continue doing all of your work and developing yourself as you develop others. the last stuff that you said about being cognizant of the challenges in your unit too, I think are also important reasons why when women are in positions of leadership, certain things can become centered as concerns on a cultural issue. So this conversation around sexual harassment and making that something that you're aware of and trying to tackle as a unit is something that is awesome. So thank you all for just the introductory comments. That was really, really great. To move on now, we're gonna go into the presentations. So everybody has prepared about, you have 15 minutes to get through your own slides. And we're gonna start with Lynn, because the question for Lynn was like, well, for everybody in the room, if you're interested in doing things, whether that's within your own unit or how to advance and then be an initiator for change, sometimes you need a budget and you need money to make things happen. But there's a lot of intricacy around the ways that decisions are made depending on how budgets get allocated, and then certain other technical things around like account types and stuff that maybe a lot of people are not familiar with. So we asked Lynn to help us kind of get a cursory overview of like what are the structures and the concrete things that people maybe take for granted that are the details of all this budget stuff that happens to the university level. So would you like to come up here and do this? Thanks.
Thanks again, Cori. I would be remiss if I didn't follow up with the other group that I spend a lot of time with, and that's Dave Ryan over in Business and Financial Services, who has procurement underneath him. And yes, last but not least, parking services. So nothing against parking services other than I have spent almost the last 2 years, it seems like, focused specifically on things in parking. To get started on this, this is going to be a challenge to figure out how best to move this forward. So I thought we'd talk very generally and more broadly than what you've probably been exposed to before if you've ever joined in on our Budget 101 sessions, and give you a little bit more background around the university. And we'll probably use some terms that you haven't necessarily heard on a regular basis, because I think many of you hear us talk about funds. And actually, when you get over and start talking with Business and Financial Services, and I get corrected on this all the time by Angie and Dave, is that, Lynn, you're talking about a sub-fund, not a fund. So our funds are actually the ones that are in the gold up there, and they are at a very high level. So we have funds that are restricted, unrestricted, that are auxiliary and self-funded. And then we've got these other things that are over on the side, which are plant, it's got our student loans in it. And typically, particularly when we get into the plant funds, though the funds that go into there are money that get transferred from the other 3 fund groups. So within each of those fund group types, we have sub-funds. And the sub-funds are what we tend to work with on a day-to-day basis. I will tell you, when we did the KFS implementation, we moved away from identifying our fund groups by these digits that you see below, but we made the conscious decision to leave those in place because they talk about business rules around how you can spend that money and how that money comes in. So Dave and Angie here again would correct me and say, Lynn, you don't need those digit numbers for the most part. You should just use the fund group name, because that's what we're using within KFS. But all of us who happen to use our accounts use those first 2 digits to be indicative of the funds. So you can see up here examples: sponsored programs, anything that runs through there is restricted. Our gift funds are restricted. We have agency, and an example of our agency funds are monies that go out to our student orgs where they raise it. We don't want them going out and creating bank accounts that say such and such student org at CSU, because all of a sudden whatever they do is reflective on us. So we require them to open a bank account through us, and all their stuff is ran through us so that we have a high level of oversight of what's going on with those accounts. And then we have some federal funds. And those are monies that typically come in for very specific programs, and I forget what they're called, but they're not appropriated through, well, they are appropriated through the federal government. But those typically go into our PVM programs and our agencies, which are indicative of the 14, 15, 17, and 19 funds. So what does restricted mean? It means that money comes in for a very specific purpose, and it can only be used for that. We don't recognize revenue on these fund groups unless you've actually spent money that's in conjunction or in compliance with that, what that requirement is. So for example, on the gift funds, they're all sitting over at the foundation. You have a 6-4 fund that is tied to a balance over in the foundation. When you spend it, twice a month, we go over and we request the foundation to send us money because it's restricted. And then we all have annual, or I think it's annual, it might be up biannual, that we have to sign off on attestation saying that yes, we've used that 6-4 money in compliance with the donor's restrictions on those accounts. So that's what I'm talking about when it's restricted. So it's a lot of resources coming into the university, but there is no discretion in how, for the most part, we use it. We do have some gift money that comes in that does have some discretion to it, but for the most part, we treat that as restricted. The unrestricted, this is where we typically live our lives. It's in our education in general, our 13 fund. The PVM and agencies also get state appropriated money through the fee-for-service resources, and that comes in as unrestricted. Our RARSP, so this is the part of the research portfolio that is actually has some discretion. I try to train people to talk about this rightly because they always talk about it as a revenue resource when in fact it's not a revenue resource, it's cost reimbursement. The federal government, for every dollar we spend on a direct expense, i.e. lab supplies, salaries, they reimburse us a certain percentage of that in what they consider cost recovery, and that's to cover the utilities, the administrative support, and those things that aren't allowable as direct expenses, so it's cost recovery. When somebody talks about it as revenue, it leaves the impression that there's so much discretion around it, and really there's not a lot of discretion. And when I say discretion, I mean in how we allocate the funds back out. It's just not a fungible fund that just goes anywhere. There are certain things that we're getting reimbursed for, and we need to the extent that's reasonable, tie those resources back to the expenses that are supporting it. Then we have course fees. Here again, course fees have a mix of restriction to them to some degree, but we have put them in the unrestricted column. Auxiliaries. Athletics falls in an auxiliary, and all of our student service type things related to the rec center, the Laurie Student Center, the CSU Health Network. And what's important about that is they have to live off of the revenue that they generate. They get no money from anywhere else, and they have to live within their budgets. And let me step back a little bit and talk about that on the other two funds groups as well. Restricted, you only get to spend what you've been awarded, so you're limited to how much you can spend by that. The unrestricted, and particularly when we're talking about the 13 and the amounts that we're showing for the PVM and agencies, those are appropriated funds, and you have to kind of think about them differently because what you get is spending authority. It's not, the concept of budget and spending authority get commingled, and it really gets challenging talking to our Board of Governors about this because you get spending authority, but then you get money carried over. Well, what they approved was your budget, which was the annual spending authority, but what you're spending is your annual spending authority plus what you get carried over. And so when we get into our actual results, it gets a little confusing. But those are funds that are actually, you're tied to being able to spend just what you've been allocated, and the cash doesn't typically follow the account, where in the other areas the cash tends to follow through those accounts. And then that last one is plant and other, and this is where if you've got a renovation to one of your classrooms or to one of your spaces, you typically transfer money from one of these three funds, assuming it's allowable, into a plant fund to be able to get that work done. And that we also take care of our assets, so our land and our buildings also reside within that fund group as well. So what I've done on this chart here is what I wanted to try to do is give a sense of how much of our resources come in are unrestricted, restricted, and that which is auxiliary and self-funded. So you can see down at the bottom on this particular slide, the restricted component is $267 million of our approximate $1.1 billion budget. Unrestricted is about $613, so it's over 50% of the entire budget of the university. And auxiliary and self-funded is $281 million. Now, the one thing that I will say, if you look at this, the legend over there, you don't see gifts. And this is something that we have been back and forth with. It's a challenge. We don't budget it. And at some point, maybe we'll get sophisticated enough and we'll figure out how we can do that reasonably. But gifts are really hard because it's money coming in and out and it's not consistent. So if you look at sponsor programs, because we do come up with a budget for that, there's trends that we can follow year after year after year with investigators that get grants in because their overall funding tends to stay the same and it's easier for us to try to budget that. It's been a struggle trying to figure out how we would do gifts. So we need to continue to work for that. So I just want you to be aware of that when you look at this because we don't include the 6-4 funds in our budget. So Cori had put in the topic she wanted me to talk about is base versus one-time. I'm sure you have all heard that. So when we go back to that 13 fund appropriation, that's where it really applies more than anything else. Your base budget is your annual appropriation is what you get. That's base. You're going to get that base every single year, and yes, Jan, you too. However, there is a way that that base can be taken away out of the 13 funds. And Jan has experienced that along with myself. It's very, very painful. We hate it, and we can't seem to get the president to acknowledge the fact that we hate it and we're being reasonable. He always feels that you can't tell me that what you're doing today, there aren't more important things than what you've been doing yesterday. So he always feels like this concept of internal reallocation is a viable concept. And logically, when you hear that there's more important things to be doing than what you were doing yesterday, we can all agree with that. But when it comes down at the end of the day and you're going to take $200,000 out of my budget, all of a sudden I'm not quite so agreeable. So that is one way in which budgets can be reduced from the base perspective, and we have been through internal reallocations quite a few times over the last 6 or 7 years. So that's base. So let's just say in your base budget, when you allocate it out, you put in a position, and it's a position that's filled. Halfway through the year, that person leaves. How long does it take you to replace that position? It could take 6 months. And so now all of a sudden, if that person had a salary of $50,000, you've got $25,000 of money that if you manage the rest of your budget line items, you've got $25,000. Well, at the end of the year, if you haven't spent it, and it fits within the 1.5% of your amount that you can carry over, all of a sudden you've got one-time dollars. Because you're going to get your base that you got this year again, and if you get your carryover, you're going to get it one time. And so that's the difference between one time. Now, there are other pots or resources for one time. And if you have a great idea of something that you want to have done, I would suggest you start with your department head. And if you can get your department head bought off on it, then the department head, if they don't have resources they carried over or other things that they've got resources that they can put towards your project, then they could go to the dean. And then the dean, if the dean's struggling to figure out how to make it happen, the dean certainly can come have a conversation with Rick or I or both of us to figure out if we've got resources that we had as carryover that we could turn around from a one-time basis and help with that project. So that's the difference between base and one-time. One-time you get it, spend it once. Base that occurs year after year after year unless you go through an internal reallocation, it gets taken away, which we don't want to have happen. 4 minutes, okay. So process and timing. The incremental budget that we do related to the E&G process occurs once a year. It starts in August, and actually Angie's probably sitting over there going, Lynn, I wish it started in August because she starts in May pulling data to start putting draft budgets together for the next year, and it actually goes for the full year. And then if you think about the whole budget process to get done, we're into August before it's really done. The resources are likely to be available. And we usually go through budget requests if those resources are available. So we're sitting in a year right now where we have not gone through a budget request cycle because our budget is so tight this year that we probably will not have available resources to allocate out beyond those things that Tony and Rick have already said yes to. Final decisions around budget allocation happen in April and May. Our board has to approve in May. We've got to get the long bill through the state legislature, which usually happens around the end of April. And anything that we do is dependent upon the board and state approvals. Here is a picture. So if you we're taking notes. You might have noticed that the unrestricted piece that I shared with you is less than this. And this is because on the E&G budget, there are those federal funds that I said was restricted. Those actually get brought into the E&G budget. So that's where we've got a little bit of a crossover between unrestricted and restricted to come up with our base budget. But here you can kind of see how we allocate out that E&G budget. 43% of it goes to instruction, 13% of it goes to academic support, and then you can see where the rest of the resources are allocated out. Here's another picture of the $621 million. You can see where the majority of those resources are going. Colleges, PVM agency, and look over to the far right, fringe benefits. It's one of the nuances we have here at CSU. Fringe on the appropriated funds is maintained centrally. That's so we can share. You get a share. You get on your units the one-time money that rolls off the salary savings. We get the one-time savings off of the fringe. And that helps when deans come asking us for money. It's one of the resources that we have, assuming the fringe pool is throwing off one time. As a result of the changes going on in the fringe rates, and if any of you work with that, you'll know that those rates are increasing. We have less and less one time that's being thrown off the fringe pool, so we don't have much as far as those resources are concerned. I'm not going to go over this schedule. I would be very happy to spend some time with any of you if you're interested. Dr. Miranda just earlier in February went through and did a Budget 101 session where we spent some time talking about this particular schedule. And I fully expect before we go back to the Board of Governors, there will be another Budget 101 session, so you'll have a chance to engage in a more detailed discussion. This is the one that happens once a year, and it's related to our E&G funding only. So with that, I'm going to turn the podium on over. Are you going to come back up, Cori? I'm going to turn it on over to Jan.
You can go. Yeah. I'll just add that if you have questions after any of the presentations, you can save them to the end when we do the Q&A.
Well, it's a pleasure to give you sort of a rundown of how a college budget operates. And I just want to put it in sort of big general terms and explain what money that I have that essentially I can play with, and where our money goes and how it comes in. And I am going to say a couple of things that are going to upset Lynn, but I'm going to try to warn her so she can go like this.
By the way, she already did. Did you hear her use the word play and talk about her budget?
I use the word play, and I'm going to also, she's not going to like how I talk about RARSP either. So this is awkward. I'm going to put glasses on and read from the screen. So I want to just give you an idea of the profile of the College of Natural Sciences. We're 8 departments and about 190 faculty, 34 special faculty. Kind of just give you the numbers that we're a pretty large unit. And if you look at the teaching, we have this is actually from last year, so this year's a little higher. 161,000 undergraduate credit hours are taught by our college. And of the sections of the all-university core curriculum, we provide over 700 of them. This is just to let you know that we have a lot of service teaching that we teach across the campus, and this is a big part of our mission, because in our college we have mathematics, physics, chemistry, biochemistry, biology, psychology, computer science, and statistics, and that was amazing. I didn't do it alphabetically. I didn't do it by, That's
why you're dean.
That's really remarkable. But I've put up there some big numbers. The E&G budget, about $34 million is what comes in. External funding, this is research grants that the faculty are bringing in terms of how much they expend in a year is about $32 million. It's those dollars that are spent that create that RARSP, or 1/6 money, and we have all these nice names for it. And then that will end up in being about $3 million to the college in indirect costs. And so that's what will come to the college. We also get between about $8 million in fundraising through Kim's team and an internal team that I have in the college. So if we look at just the 3 primary sources of income, we have other types of accounts also, but in terms of our big picture, The 34 million in E&G, that's also called RI. It's also called 1-3. It's also called 13. Okay? And so we use these terms like everybody understands them. It's all the same thing. And it's about 76% of the budget that the college has to operate on. The ICR, which is also called overhead, which is also called RARSP, which is also called 1/6, and it's called 16. Same thing. We get about $3 million a year. I've put that in the pie there as 6%, but that is not base funding. That is going to change each year, hopefully getting larger. And then fundraising in the last couple of years have been about 18% of the money that I put in this picture. Again, this is not meant to show you how it's spent. It's just sort of the big picture of how the money is coming in. If you looked at our 1-3 budget, or the RI, resident instruction, education in general, all of that money, it's kind of, I started at about 2010 just to show you that we were around $28-29 million. It's just kind of going along steady. Then you can see it starts dropping. That's when we had our budget cuts. We actually lost about $4 million. And then it starts looking like we skyrocketed up to where we are now at about $34 million. The reason we skyrocketed up is not because Lynn became more generous and gave us more money. And I want to make that really clear right here. This is money.
Take money away from this gal.
I'm dangerous. But what happened was, this is when the university started charging differential tuition to the students. And so juniors and seniors who take courses with a natural science prefix will pay $70 a credit hour in addition to their regular tuition. The provost takes about $11 of that per credit hour, leaving $59 a credit hour that comes directly to the college. And so that's that big jump. The other thing are the 236 funds. How many have heard this phrase, 236? I hear it too much, because it's like this, it's almost like, well, Jan, you don't need money from us, because I do go on the Hill asking for money, and it's like, well, you have 236, just pay for it with your 236, pay for it with your 236, Jan, your 236. Well,
So is the admin building the Hill?
I usually call it 666 Oval Drive. Are we sure we're filmed?
She was warned.
But what is 236? 236 money is enrollment management or enrollment growth money. So if the university brings in more students this year who take more credit hours than last year, it means there's more money in the university. And what Provost Miranda, Lynn Johnson, and Tony Frank did was they said, and you can, what the 236 refers to is half of that delta, whatever that amount of money is, half of it, 1/2, so that's the 2, that stays in the central coffers.
No, you get it.
Oh, that's mine. That stays with me. 1/3 goes to the central, and 1/6 goes to the provost, 236. That's what that means. And that does bring in a lot of additional resources to the college. But if the enrollment is flat at the university level, there could be 0 236 money available, even if my college has taught more credit hours, has more majors, because the students have shifted over, but they haven't increased. So 236 doesn't work exactly, I think, as people think it is. But that's what the 2, the 3, and the 6 are. And I thought I'd point that out. And yes, I'm the 2. You're the 3, Rick's the 6. That is correct. So anyway, that's why we see that increase. And now it's been flat again. We're at about $34 million. That's about what we can depend on differential tuition. And the 236 money can really vary. Last year we had an incredible amount of growth in the university and the college. This year, very little. And so I won't be seeing a lot of 236 money, but the differential tuition keeps going. It's much more reliable to count on. So of the $34 million, I pass 85% of that out to the departments. So there's a list of our departments and outreach programs, because I also fund outreach programs as a budget line. That's just a priority that I have for our college, and so I separate that out, like Little Shop of Physics, Education Outreach Center. So 85% goes to them. I retain 15%, which is about $5 million. And so that's where I pay all of the staff of the dean's office. I also have some employees that are out in the departments but paid by the college. And I also have some of those resources in order to work with, developing new programs, adding sections of things. If at the last minute we find out we need another section of introductory chemistry, so we got to get an instructor and some GTAs in there. So I have a little bit of flexibility there. If you look at what the departments do and the dean's office and how that money is spent, 98% of it is going to salaries. Faculty represent about 71% in our college. I don't think this is any different than any other college or any other unit on campus, probably. We have the admin pros, GTAs, state classified, student hourly. There's 2% that is not in a body of some sort. And so the frustration I have is, even though the Board of Governors and Tony and others really like this reallocation model, and I kind of agreed to it as well, 98% isn't a person. And so if you want to take 2% away, somebody's losing their job. And I just don't like that. I just don't like that, Lynn.
I don't either. That's a girl.
There just isn't. We all are in this boat. There's no fat anymore. It's just, we're down to bone. And so reallocation is very hard for us. Fortunately, in the college, we do have a large research funding coming in. And even though it's not base funding, I can use it as bridge to hopefully get us across the reallocation issues so that I can protect our people. So that's sort of the 1-3 budget. And although this slide looks like, I think, any other college probably, except we have a lot of GTAs and other units, other colleges don't, I'm not sure about this slide. I know that I put 85% back out into the department, so that's very decentralized model, but I'm not so sure if that's what the other 7 colleges do. I really don't know. So most of you are not from the College of Natural Sciences. I think I see about 4 here. So I don't know if liberal arts has this 85-15. I just don't know. So that could be very different, depending upon if you're more centralized or decentralized unit. This also means that I don't have much money for the department to dicker with, I did want to say, though, that my philosophy when a department chair does come to me because a faculty member or a staff member has an idea for a project and they come to me and says, Jan, I've got this idea, I really want to do this. My reaction immediately is, help me say yes. Help me say yes. And that means that they're going to have to cost share, they're going to have to help me find the way to make this happen, because these are great ideas. I don't just say no, I've got, it's help me say yes. And I just want to encourage people that that's just I think that's a better attitude. I think if Lynn Johnson had that kind of an attitude.
The shade is remarkable.
For everyone but you, Jan.
I know. I feel it. So then I wanted to tell you, this 1/6 money, the RARSP, the indirect cost, the ICR, the 16. How does that money flow through the university? Because this is sort of a mystery to people. For us, the $32 million, when you have research expenditures, that then, I don't remember, it's like paying back. What did you?
Reimbursement.
Reimbursement for the overhead, that it takes to operate the university. And it generates about $8 million. Our 32 generates about $8 million in indirect costs to the university. So where does that money go? So we start out with $8 million, and 51%, this is my physics joke for the physics. What is this? It's a black hole. It, do you see? This is what happens to 51% of it. So 51% of it goes into the university to operate the university. This is why we have lights in this room and air conditioning and so forth. 51%. Then the VPR, about 13%. Now the VPR will tell you I do not get 13%. And he kind of does, kind of doesn't. But he does have a piece of about 6 or 7%. But then you have the RBRF, if you've heard that. That's the Research Building Revolving Fund, and that's money that we can use for operating the maintenance and so forth on buildings, I think. And I don't know all what we can do with that money. The core facilities, like in our case, the chemistry instrument facility, that is a core facility. They get a little piece. And all the programs of research and scholarly excellence, they get a little piece. And that adds up to about 13%. I don't even need 2 minutes. Okay, great. But I appreciate the warning. Then Rick takes 0.75%, and I don't know why. And then, come on, Angie. And then we end up with about 2.8 to, about $3 million of that 8. This money is hard because the chairs and faculty, they want this money. They're saying, I brought that money into the university. I want part of that 51%. I want part of that 13. So the 13, actually, some of that 13% does come back to the colleges because we are the PRSEs, we are the core facilities, and we are the buildings. And so that, and the VPR uses these funds in order to help us cost share startup packages for new faculty. That also comes back to the college. So a lot of that money does come back reasonably directly. And so then what do I do with it? And this is where different colleges will do different things, but I keep 40% and I give 60% to the departments. So it goes as it is earned. But then when the department chair comes and says to me, we want to hire a new faculty member, or we want to do X, Y, or Z, I'm in for 40%. So we start our negotiations as a 60-40, because I said, that's the money I have, this is the money you have, and we're just going to start our negotiations there. This also, I think, is very different depending upon what college you're in, where this money is retained. I think some retain a lot more of it in the college. Maybe some give more to the departments. But this is a good place for me, anyway, that I've landed on. And then my final slide is to essentially introduce the importance of fundraising, and Kim will tell us about that. We bring in about $6 to $8 million a year in fundraising, and this comes from alumni. In our case, corporations and foundations play a big part of this, and then friends of the college. And I spend probably 20 to 30% of my time now in fundraising, and I think that's we're seeing that trend in deans and department chairs. Just more and more of us are putting a lot of time into this, and I really also enjoy it. I think that meeting people and telling them about the good things that your faculty and staff are doing, it's an exciting part of the job. So, Kim.
Before we jump in, just so you know, Jan, thank you so much for sharing a little bit about the insight of your decision-making process. I think the Help Me Say Yes is a really good framework to understand sort of how you're allocating funds. And then we did ask him to come and speak a little bit about advancement, because for people who aren't aware, it might seem very disconnected so there's all this money coming in with these huge campaigns. How does that connect to us if we're just feeling like we don't see any of the money, and then seems like it's very fancy a lot with a lot of extravagance at times. So if there's just some disconnect or cultural misunderstandings about what advancement sort of is, we were hoping that you could give a little bit about, what is advancement, what does it do, and then why is it so central to the university. So.
All right, thank you. That's a lot. I hope I cover it, but just to start, our mission in advancement is connecting alumni and donors to their passions at Colorado State University. So that looks like a lot of different forms on that. So that's why I keep my phone with me, because yesterday, I don't know if you noticed, we had some stuff going on with athletics, and a lot of people are passionate about athletics. So I offered up trading jobs yesterday afternoon with the women cabinet and deans, and nobody was going to take me up on it. Even though it's fancy, it's like, are you kidding? You have a donor saying, why is this happening? And I'm changing my gift from $5 million gift that people rely on to another area. So I have my phone and it started buzzing, and I thought, oh my gosh, another thing from athletics. I look at it and it's like, Mom, call me right away. And I'm like, oh my gosh, it's lunchtime, what's going on? So I have to discreetly, hopefully, text over there, say, Aiden, are you okay? What's going on? He's like, can Jackson come over after school? Are you kidding me right now. I'm in a presentation, and I'm a very important person. Oh my gosh. It's fancy, all right, that, and trying to get my PhD done and everything else. So yeah, it's all glam and advancement, but I do feel really, really privileged. I'm passionate about philanthropy, and I've taken it on as my life mission. When I started in the profession, you'd go to a party, and my kids' friends' parents, or I'd go to a faculty meeting, and they'd say, "What do you do?" And I go, "I work in advancement." They're like, "Ooh, I'm out of here." It was like you had the late stages of leprosy or something. And so, I was like, what is that about? I love the work I do. I get to meet with really interesting people, the people who care about things, care about social justice, making the world a better place. Why do people not understand this? And so I'm happy to say in my 15 years at CSU, I've seen a real shift. About after our last campaign, people are like, wow, my neighbor's getting some money. It's making a difference to their budget. What is that advancement thing? I don't want to do it. I don't want to have any part of it, but I'm kind of curious about it. They're no longer running away. And then recently, in the last few years, we've really seen a new phenomenon where it's like so many people are coming to us saying, we want an advancement team. Alan Rudolph, when he started, he said, where's research in this? Where's our development team? And I said, Alan, research lives everywhere in everybody's campaign goal in every college and unit. He's like, no, we need a fundraiser to do the cross-disciplinary stuff. And so I said, help me say yes, Alan. So he did. He put in 50%. We put in 50%. We've grown that team to 3 people. It's one of the best units, one of our best young up-and-coming women leaders who worked with Jan, started out with Jan in the College of Natural Sciences, got great training there. She has a $16 million goal this year, her and her team, and they are kicking butt and taking names. So, it has changed. The culture has changed, and you'll see that in some of my slides down the road. And some of that is why has this changed and what is the gap that advancement development dollars are filling in as other budget funding sources are shrinking. So that's our mission. People say, what's this deal about advancement? Why don't you just call it fundraising? And again, back to my calling. This is a very serious profession that I think is an absolute privilege to work with donors who are going to give us and their resources, leave legacies to us at CSU. Is a privilege to be there with people facilitating it. It's a privilege to work with all of you and have your dreams come alive. So the work around advancement, we have 3 areas. We advance the institution. That's the whole moniker of advancement. So we are here to advance the institution and our one function in our team is development. Those are our fundraisers that you think of as fundraisers. But development, it's more than fundraising. It's about developing relationships that stand the test of time. They stand the changes in deans and leaderships changing, coaches changes. They care about CSU. If we built relationships and developed relationships with people, and we have stewarded and done the things we said we would with their cherished resources that they've worked hard to acquire, that they've just given us, if we do what we say we're going to do, they'll give again. So it's really about developing relationships. That's why our folks are called development teams and development officers. So this is our high-level org chart for you. All I wanted to point out here is the piece on the, I guess it's your right-hand side of the screen, is that we have a college. In every college, like Jan mentioned, we have a development team embedded, as well as 4 of our units, athletics, the library, student affairs, and research now have development teams. We have an operational team that's on the other side. And then we work really closely with the CSU Foundation. People sometimes get us confused. Are you the same entity? Are you different? They are their own separate 501c3. They act like a bank. They take in the money, they invest it, and they send it back to us, basically, is the model. But we work very, very closely with them. So there's lots of different models across the country on how this works, but that's our structure. So and every college and unit, many of you represent those areas, have their own team. When I came to CSU, I started working in College of Natural Resources. I was a team of 1. I don't think that's a team, right? But as time has gone on, the deans have invested heavily in this space, not only their time, but their resources, knowing that this will return resources back to their college. So this is Jan's amazing executive director, Simone Klassen, and then she's got a team of 3 people who work with her. Why is this important? So if you are one of those stats people out there, but you want to look at numbers like Lynn, this is why it's important. This is not just some people have said, I want to invest in this space and do this out of the bottom of my heart, but most people want to see the business case for this, and this is why. So the green, the yellow bars, gold bars, are state support. And this is our campaign period, and the green bars are private support. So we, years ago, before this campaign, started eclipsing the amount of funding that the state was providing this institution, and it's only gone up. Now, we could have a whole afternoon session on whether that's right or wrong. We're not going to solve that right now, but the reality is that fundraising is here to stay. Development is an essential component of the university's financial health, not just at CSU, but many places. That's why you see your deans and other people investing in this space. So why do donors give? Number one, they think, people say to us, like, just get your checkbook out or get them to give. They don't give because we have a need at CSU, because your budget is shrinking. That is not why they're giving. Giving is a very optimistic act. They want to believe, even if they want to eradicate sexual abuse or give a student a chance or something, donors are trying to change the world to make it a better place. They give because of students, like our student David Purcella here, who was born blind and legally blind and deaf, and he's thrived at CSU. They give to programs that help our students thrive. They give to people, leaders they believe in. We have a great leader in Tony Frank. People believe in the vision of Jan Nerger. They give because of our deans and their vision and all of the work that you're doing. That's why donors give to CSU. So I just wanted to start with that framework. It's not because you have a gap in your budget. And if you think that way, I challenge you to think about what opportunity does that represent? People don't want to fill a gap, and it's not a very optimistic act in terms of just filling something that might not be better tomorrow. They want to see things better. They want to see change. So how do we do that? We always talk about development being the blend of art and science. We have so much data. All of you in stats would love how much data we have. It's really amazing what we can predict, and I'm going to circle back with Lynn on what we can predict. I can predict a fundraiser and what their success rate is over time, a college, other things. So we have lots of data. But we also, it's an art in building a relationship. So this is the cycle when people want to know. I know that was one of the questions posed to me. So we have a research team that helps us identify potential donors. We spend time qualifying them to see if they really do have the resources we think, or do they have the interest even in CSU. They might have had a terrible experience here. They might, we have to qualify people. Then we spend this long time in the cultivation time. It's really getting to know people to understand what are their interests. Are they interested in incarcerated women and literacy? Then I'm going to call Toby and say, okay, we can cultivate this relationship. Maybe there's some more care. And the solicitation part is the part that freaks people out. First of all, you have professionals to help with that, number one. Number two, it's a really short part in the overall cycle. So don't let that scare you off from fundraising. And then another key part that CSU is very good at, and why we continue to get the amazing donations we are, is in stewardship. So if you get asked to provide a report from Beth Etter to do a nice report, communication piece to a donor or a newsletter, that's important. They want us to be accountable back and steward them and their resources. And it's not about the size of gift. People want accountability in this day and age, and we owe it to those people who have given us their hard-earned dollars for nothing in return except for to see this world be a better place. So that's the cycle. Your best next donor is often a current donor. Ed Warner started giving $50, his first gift to CSU years ago in honor of a beloved person. I said, Ed, do you remember what gift you gave? And he thought it was something else. He goes, oh, and then I reminded him of it. He said, oh, yeah, I remember that. He goes, I love that guy. And he died in a plane crash. It was really tragic, and I gave $50. That's when I had no money. And so he gave at that time and just kept continuing to give and doing graduate support, and then an endowed chair, and then a college naming, and he's now doing the building. I mean, if we steward people right and do what we say we're going to do, people will give again. So that's quickly the development cycle. Just quickly, also another thing that people are often confused about, where does this money come from? So there's a big bag of money and small number of people, and the opposite is true on the other side. So really, when we are spending time, we spend a lot of time on major gifts because we know that is where the biggest return for the institution is, where we will bring the most resources back. So we are a resource limited department just like everybody else. So when we have to allocate our timing, our funds, it's often people think it's the annual fund, it's the buy a brick at the stadium. That didn't help with the stadium numbers. It was a nice feel-good project, but it was the major gifts that got us there with that particular project. Same thing at the University Center for the Arts. So just wanted to make sure people understood that. The other thing that comes up with people who are unfamiliar with development is where the source of funding comes from. People think, oh, corporations, foundations, they give a lot of money, and at CSU we have a fair share. We actually punch above our weight on corporate and foundation giving, but individuals are the ones who make those transformational gifts, like the Walter Scott College of Engineering naming, those big gifts, and the big difference maker in raising 50 million when I came to CSU to 190 million are those big gifts that we get in. So we spend a lot of time in that space. The other thing that people are surprised by, they think it's all alumni who give. Well, our top 10 donors, many of them are not CSU alumni, but they're community members that care, like Pat Stryker. There are people who want to cure cancer, like John Malone. There are people who have degrees other places but see the excellence of our work or are in our community and want to give back. So this is just a breakdown of how people give. What do they give? Just want to make sure you understood that. Annual gifts, here my phone is texting again, it's my son, really? Annual gifts are gifts that you live by. Think about it as your checking account. So when donors make a gift, it's like, out of my checking account is different what I could write a check for versus some of our other donors who will do $100,000 in a year, and that's their annual gift. It's coming, they don't have to think about it, they give through that. So that's the point, is that the scale is so different depending on how people give. Major gifts are things that people have to think about and it takes some time to deliberate. So you'd have to think about, do I really want to take that money out of my savings account to buy the car or do whatever a big purchase is or do the home renovation? That's kind of like a major gift when we're starting to talk to people. So everybody's number is different. My family, we just made a major gift in our family this year, and it was really big for us, but really small compared to the other people given to that project. But we talked about it as a family for many months and toured the site and decided what we were going to do. Plan gifts are legacy gifts that people will leave. Think about them as things that take significant planning, like your retirement fund. So what are you going to do after, what's your legacy? So that just gives you a little bit of a context. How do people give? These are just different vehicles, not to be confused by the other things. They can give cash, this is number one. Cash is always number one because it's easy, gets into the hands of all of you right away. But there's lots of sophistication. We have lawyers and accountants that help on our team to do all of these things. 5, 1. Okay, yep, quick. I'm almost done. So where do donors live? This is the other thing I want to call to your attention, that donors are not just in Colorado. We spend a lot of time working outside the state, that people care about what we're doing outside of the state. So this is color-coded for where our funding comes from. So people love CSU all across the country, and we will work everywhere. The number one thing you have to remember today, how do you get involved? Because Lynn was talking about 64 funds and all those things. This is what you need to know. Anybody know Where's Waldo? You need to know where Waldo is, and in your case, that is your college development officer. So you don't have to know how to solicit people. You don't have to know how to get the money from here to there or get the 501c3 form filled out. Just know your development officer. That is the major takeaway today, is that they are your conduit to navigating this very complex world with donors, and how does the money get into the hands of the faculty that you need, all of those pieces. One thing you just need to do, if you don't know your development officer after today, make sure that you get to know them. And then finally, just our campaign. We are in a $1 billion campaign right now, which is an organized movement around priorities of an institution. And we are almost $900 million to our $1 billion campaign. I thought you'd be interested in knowing where that money has gone. So it goes out to all of you. So they're buckets. People think we have the safe in our office. We really don't. So I don't even have a buck sometimes for my kids for something. But research, scholarships, endowed positions, and facilities. And we've done really well on all of those things, with the exception of endowed chairs, which are a tough sell outside of academia. So I'd be happy to answer questions around that later, but that is where the money goes, and in our campaign where it has gone. So that's, I know, a really big, quick, fast overview, but hopefully that gives you a little bit of a sense of the work we do, the complexity of it, and that it's a lot of hard work. I know it looks like a lot of glamour, but it's a lot of hard work and doesn't happen just by chance. There's a lot of planning and a lot of really generous people who care about the work that all of you do in CSU. So thank you.
Thank you to all three of you for such an informative 45 minutes of time. That was really excellent. So we have now 19 minutes for questions from you all. If you have something that you want to clarify, you can say it, and then I'll repeat it so that we get it on the recording. But now is the time to open it up. Yeah.
Question about the 236 funds. So this is the enrollment growth money, right? Can you tell me how that's allocated to the colleges? So is it done per college based on each college's enrollment at census, or in some other way?
I'm going to do my best to pontificate and work through the response on that, but Angie is here, and she's the one who actually works pretty closely with the provost office to get this done. So what we do is we do take once census has occurred. And actually it's not even census, because we're being asked long before we even get to the first day of class what that number is going to look like. So Angie spends a lot of time working with Laura Jensen over in IR to take a look and figure out what that number is going to look like, so that we can start at least giving units ideas of what they might be able to expect. But the actual formal allocation will be based on census data, and it will be based on the credit hours that the students have taken. So the dollar amounts then are distributed based upon the increase in the credit hours from the prior year to this year. And then we shore that up again in the springtime, because all the resources don't get sent out. Just a portion of them get sent out in the fall so that they can get sections up and running, and that's really why we get pressure before the first class, is so that we can give a sense of what resources are going to be out there. Am I pretty much online there, Angie?
Yeah, let me just add that 80% is based off student credit hours, and then 20% is major. So the provost does throw in an 80-20 split.
So 20% is based on the number of students that graduate from college.
Yeah, because we wanted to
It's based on the number of new majors that they have. So you could have a program in engineering, for example, that really grew, but they don't generate a lot of credit hours on those students. Those courses are being taught, say, in natural sciences and liberal arts, but they'll get a share of that 236 because they've seen a growth in their number of majors.
The whole reason why that was designed is it's trying to motivate the right kind of behaviors that we want at the university. So the best way to motivate those behaviors is have the resources follow. The other thing that I would say about the 236, it's enrollment growth, and the challenge that we had when we first started thinking about that is there is a huge difference between what our residents and our non-resident students pay. So what we do is we go through this detailed calculation of a net tuition calculation, which takes total tuition generated, and it subtracts out what we're providing as institutional financial aid, so we're coming down to a net number. And then that gets divided by the number of FTE that we have. So what happens is the dollars that come in off of enrollment growth get broken out into two categories. One is actual enrollment growth based on net tuition, and then the other piece is the change in mix. Because we have had a history over the last couple of years of dropping in our resident students, but growing significantly in non-resident. So that change in mix ends up being resources that the university receives that is not being allocated through the 236. It actually flows through the regular budget.
I said I was going to do my best to recap, but I'm not on that. Okay, Shannon?
It seems to me that if you're going to have 20 to 30 years of left of a career period, that fundraising skills might be something to invest in. So I have heard about the Certified Fundraising Executive Program. Will you comment on that, Kim, or suggest something else?
I love that. I love it. Converts. And if you're going to stay in higher ed anywhere, not just at CSU, we see that with graduate students learning how to apply for grants and funding. It's a real difference maker for you in your career, no matter where you are. So I think it's a great skill to have or understanding. So the CFRE is actually an exam adjudicated by the same body as the LSAT and other professional exams. So you have to have you have to recert every 3 years. So you have to have 5 years of experience before and go through. It takes about 3 hours to do their application, and you have to have proven practice. You have to volunteer yourself and your personal. There's a lot of criteria. So you're walking the talk. But there are a lot of other, so it's a great certification after you've been working in this space for some time, but there are many other offerings. So the Academic Impressions does some training for people in academia. I've been to several of them with department chairs. It's usually people, non-development people, who they do a couple times a year. They run some really great courses. CASE also has, Jan, you're nodding, I think you've probably been to the Dean's Level 1. So there are lots of different training opportunities, but I'd start maybe with Academic Impressions for their training for folks in academia outside of the development profession, and I can send you some others too as I think of them.
Thanks, yeah. Okay, and I'm sorry to interrupt you, but new plan, will you restate the question into the microphone before you answer, please? That way I don't have to interrupt. Thanks.
For Jan, on the 236 funding, since it's one-time funding, isn't it? I mean, how do you manage?
No, it
It
comes in as
actually
base.
comes in as base.
Oh, so it's actual base funding
Yeah.
that continues every year?
So she wants to know, is 236 money base or one time? So the first year it comes in, it's going to be one time, because we would not have built it into the budget. But the next year, we will build it into the base budget, because we do realize that units need to get course sections up and running if they've actually got significant growth in their enrollment. So that first year, one time, then base.
So you can hire faculty.
Correct, because it is base, and so you can hire faculty or add GTAs or anything you want. And I think my philosophy is that's money coming in because of the students. It should go back out to the students. So it's always going to go to something that has to do with the student success initiatives. Whereas any increase in, for example, 1.6 money, we're probably going to direct that toward research in some fashion. So we try to separate it out, but it is base.
And then Kim, I don't remember if I saw in your chart, but how much giving comes from staff, faculty, and retirees?
You know what, I don't have the stats on that right now with me. It's a smaller number. I know that it's about $1 million a year that over the campaign period on average that we've received, but it's super important, and I'm glad you raised that. I should have included that, because our donors, when they give back, they say, I've, earned this money through my job and doing other things, and I'm still giving back to my area, and I really, it's an extra seal of approval that everybody cares about what's happening at that institution. And so we have lots of people who give. Our emeritus and retirees are very generous and very active. We started a program to engage them several years ago because we saw them as part of our family, like alumni. They spend many more years here than some of our alumni do. And so we realized there was a disconnect, and we were hearing from them that they would retire and then sort of feel forgotten about by the institution. And for us, we're like, you are part of this family. And they were really leaving a lot of legacy gifts, the plan gifts that I talked about. We have really active participation in that category from people who've been staff members to UDPs and everything in between, because they give so many years and care about CSU. So it's a very active component. And so we like to measure more on percentage of engagement than dollars, really, because it's just so important. So we appreciate that for anybody who's a faculty staff donor.
I have a question. Kim, when you first started, you were talking about your team and having so many women on your team being really excellent negotiators. And one of the other things that we know about negotiation, it can be difficult for some women to negotiate on their own behalf, but women are very successful in negotiating on behalf of others, including other women. And despite the shade of the 3 presentations, I appreciate that you all connected to each other and explained, well, this is when I would go to Lynn, or Jan has done this, and that's how Kim has helped out with our college. And so there's clearly been so many interactions among even just the 3 of you in your respective roles that I was wondering if you could speak to the significance or importance of negotiating with each other and for others in your position, and how that has helped manifest like successful, I don't know, achievements or changes from where you sit.
Do you want all of us to answer?
Yeah, or any or all.
I'm going to say that I do think women are better at negotiating for others than for themselves. I think that is absolutely true. When women are negotiating with me, like new faculty or new hires in the staff, I actually help them negotiate with me, which seems kind of strange, but that's their time to negotiate. And if they're not accustomed to that. But then when I go to people like Lynn or Kim or anybody in the administration, I don't think of it as negotiating. Because negotiating to me says you're on two different sides of the table, and we are all on the same side of the table. But we really are, right? So, and I tell my department chairs that too. I said, if you're going to come to me and ask for $50,000, if you need $50,000, don't ask me for 100. Ask me for 50. And if I have 50, that's what I'll give you. And if I have 30, I'm going to tell you that's what I have. So now we're at 30 and 50. We're not going to negotiate. There's no negotiation. I'm not going to negotiate with my own team. Now, if I'm going to negotiate with the provost and another dean, well, now I'm negotiating, right? Because I'm a different team in that sense. But I think that women, though, have to help each other negotiate.
What comes to my mind is relationships. I think that's what you see up here is that Lynn, Jan, and I all know each other. We see each other at different events. We do work together. And if you have a foundation of respect and honesty, and you can work together, and you always put the institution first and try to approach it from that then when you have tough times where you have to negotiate something, where you have different positions on something, it's much easier to come to agreement around that and find better solutions together. And I think there's a willingness to do that. And I think women do that really well in building those relationships. And so that would be just one thing that I think you see up here, but also advice on working in universities and getting things done. I see plenty of people in our business. Sometimes people come from the corporate sector and they just spin their wheels in academia. And I think it's relationships are you put a real premium on them internally. I always tell our team members when they're new, leading a unit like Jan's, spend as much time in the first 3 months building those internal relationships as you will with your donors externally, because they'll really be the foundation for you going forward and getting things done.
Well, because then you're not negotiating, you're problem solving.
Right. Feels different.
It feels totally different.
Yeah.
I don't know if I can paraphrase that. Where do you start with development? But it was much bigger than that.
Yeah.
And I see that. So don't feel alone, because I saw that, and I worked in liberal arts for many years. I had 9 years. And there were many people, like the arts were our big cachet. Like they're the entryway to the university in a lot of ways. But, you know, people are trying to publish a book or do something that is not as visible as others. It's still very important. But so you see that in all the different colleges and units. And I'd say that where people have made, and I'd say, I would challenge you on nobody wants to give to us, because there's always somebody who wants to, but it's how do we frame this? Like, how do we frame this to show that this is an integral part of the process and it's important and you're a piece of that. Now, part of that is just getting in the game. And it's interesting you talked about this, because I just had a call with Tim Hackett yesterday, because I spent half my week last week managing a donor proposal that left out some key areas. And it was not the development team, it was like peer-to-peer faculty doing that. And so the thing is, you're going to get out of this what you put into it. You're gonna be faced with lots of choices for your time. If you're willing to put some time into development, you'll get more out of it. So you have to be visible. So making sure, back to my Where's Waldo slide, so if nothing else, make sure your development team knows who you are, understands the importance of your work in the whole ecosystem. That's a place to start. And you might have to continue to do that because you'll have turnover in the development team or other things, but really articulating that to them first, because they will be in the process we have where faculty are supposed to work with the development teams on proposals. They can be the gatekeepers on that, saying, wait a minute, like if I had known, well, if I'd even been a part of this proposal before it went out the door, I could have worked him in and said, okay, we are missing urgent care in this proposal and some other components. So that's a start. Is you're back to the Where's Waldo slide. Is just know your development people, make sure that they know the value of your work. You can, progress to new steps after that, but that's the first part, and not to feel apologetic for the work that you do. It's all important, and they can help you with that too, and articulating why your role is just as important as those people, the clinicians on the front side. And a lot of times that's us bringing that to the discussion, and they have such a frontline role with donors. They can also influence donors on understanding that too. So I'd say that that's critical. Absolutely.
And I would,
Yeah.
in parallel, start with your dean. Because your dean has another set of resources, but also your dean's on the road. And if he understands what you are doing and gets excited about it, that's what he's going to project out to donors. So it's your development officer and it's your dean.
Okay.
And the president happened to have come from veterinary pathology, so. But I would go to the dean, make sure he understands what you're doing and how exciting it is, and get him to talk the talk for development.
Well, we are at time, so I want to thank all three of you again for taking the time to present, and thank you all for being here. Again, the next event of this series and the last one for the semester will be April 6th, and that one will be occurring in Longspeed on the other side of the LSC. So thank you so much.